This is the story of a simple human, surrounded by advanced alien minds and incredible technology, who shocked everyone by solving what seemed like a disaster, using only plaster, gauze, and a calm voice. The classroom at the Intergalactic Academy of Applied Sciences was filled with nervous energy. Sitting with bright Etherian students, Big Mock, and many-armed Zerkari, Luke Mason, a human from Iowa, turned the pages of his anatomy book. His pen made soft sounds as he took notes, carefully copying the pictures his teachers sent to their screens. Luke didn't think the lessons were easy, not at all. Alien bodies were complicated, with glowing parts and strange bendable bones that made learning anatomy a whole new challenge. But what always surprised him was how his classmates panicked over small injuries. While he was writing, a loud crack sounded across the room. Everyone gasped. Luke quickly looked up and saw a Zerkari student falling from a tall lab platform. The student landed badly, its lower legs bending in a scary way. It made a sharp clicking noise, and its arms and legs shook. Other students hurried over. "Move back," an Etherian student yelled, waving thin arms. "It broke something important." No, call the medical drone," a Moki shouted. Luke rose from his bench, crossing the room as the Zerkari writhed. "Give him space," he said, voice calm. His classmates turned, eyes wide with panic. One of them, a young Etherian with a faint green glow along her forearms, stammered, "He's going into shock. The limb's broken, shattered." Luke crouched next to the injured Zerkari, gently examining the joint. The limb was indeed bent at an unnatural angle, the distal segment twisted away from the main axis. There was swelling, sharp lines under the translucent skin that suggested a fracture, but the alien's vital signs, monitored by the class drones, remained stable, heart rate elevated but steady, oxygen saturation normal. "Looks like a distal radius fracture," Luke said, more to himself. "Clean break." The alien students gaped. "What?" "Just needs a cast, not surgery," Luke continued, his tone steady. He rifled through his bag, pulling out a small roll of gauze and a makeshift splint fashioned from a sturdy plastic ruler. "Hold still," he murmured to the Zerkari, whose clicks of pain quieted slightly, as Luke worked. A Moki student hovered nearby. "But he fell from at least 3 meters. The Bond. Shouldn't he be rushed to emergency care, genetic regrowth, neural stabilizers?" Luke glanced up briefly. "Not necessary. The break is clean. There's no neurovascular compromise, and the swelling's manageable. Just needs immobilization and a cast. We'll splint it for now and get him to the medical bay for a proper cast and X-ray to confirm alignment." The room had gone utterly silent. The human Zada, the one who hadn't grown up in a world of bone regeneration chambers and instant skeletal reconstruction, had stepped forward with calm efficiency and turned chaos into order. "Wrap here," Luke instructed, pointing to a section of the Zerkari's limb. "We'll pad it, stabilize the joint, and keep it elevated. The bones will set fine with a cast if we get it done soon. Surgeries for displaced fractures or complications, and he doesn't have either." "But not easier," an Aetherian protested, her voice trembling. "Our protocols." "Protocols are fine," Luke said, his tone gentle but firm. "But this isn't a catastrophic injury, it's just a broken limb. He'll heal." He finished the splint, securing it snugly but not tightly. The Zerkari's breathing had calmed, the pained clicks replaced with a low, vibrating hum. Luke nodded. "There. Let's carry him to the medical bay so the docs can get proper imaging and cast him up. He'll need a few weeks to heal, maybe some physical therapy, but he'll be fine." The alien students stood frozen as Luke and a couple of Mock gently lifted the Zerkari and carried him down the hall. Even the class drones, programmed to record and analyze, emitted faint beeps of recalibration as they registered the human's actions. As they moved down the corridor, Mason the Moch glanced at Luke. "You're sure this is enough? In our protocols, we'd prep for skeletal reconstruction immediately." Luke gave a half smile. "I grew up seeing injuries like this on the farm. You fall from a height, you break a bone. You set it, cast it, wait 6 to 8 weeks. Nature does the rest. Not everything needs high-tech solutions. Sometimes it's just about patience." The Moke huffed, glancing down at the Zerkri, who was now breathing calmly, even managing a faint pulse of bioluminescent appreciation. "You humans are weird," he said, though without malice. Luke chuckled softly. "Yeah, but it works." As they turned the corner into the medical bay, the murmur of astonishment from the rest of the class still echoed behind them. The simple efficiency of a human with plaster and gauze had shifted their entire understanding of what resilience meant. In the days following the incident, the story of the human who healed the Zerkri with nothing but gauze and calm words spread through the Intergalactic Academy's halls faster than any official announcement. It wasn't just the students talking. Lecturers, medtechs, and even passing maintenance staff whispered about the human who had turned an apparent crisis into an exercise in simple practicality. Luke Mason, however, found the attention both amusing and slightly annoying. He hadn't done anything remarkable, at least by human standards. But in a school filled with species accustomed to instant regeneration and surgical intervention, his decision to use a splint and gauze seemed almost rebellious. He found himself invited to study groups he hadn't joined before, as if curiosity had suddenly given him an unofficial celebrity status. A moch named Rorik, previously dismissive of human primitive methods, now sat across from him at lunch, asking genuine questions about human first aid training. "So you're telling me," Rorik said, gnawing thoughtfully on a protein bar, "you guys learn this kind of stuff as kids?" Luke nodded. "Basic first aid's a big deal back home. Broken arms, sprains, cuts, you name it. You learn to stay calm, assess the situation, and do what you can before real help arrives. You don't panic. Panic makes everything worse." Rorik grunted. "Our protocols call for immediate biostabilizers and regrowth prep. Panic's not in the manual, but it sure comes naturally when you don't have a med bay within reach." Luke smiled faintly. "That's the thing, on Earth you don't always have a med bay. Sometimes it's you and a broken bone, and you've got to keep your head." Meanwhile, the Zerkri student, whom Luke had learned was named Kivrek, was recovering well in the Academy's medical wing. X-rays taken with the advanced imaging systems confirmed Luke's initial assessment, a clean distal radius fracture with minimal displacement. The alien doctors, initially skeptical, now praised his quick thinking, acknowledging that his first response likely prevented unnecessary complications. A few days later, during a biomechanics lab, Kivrek returned with his arm in a custom-designed cast, a mix of human plaster techniques and alien synthflex materials. He raised the limb slightly, bioluminescence along his limbs shimmering with gratitude. "Better than surgery," Kivrek said softly, his voice translated through the classroom's audio nodes. "Thank you, Mason." Luke gave a small nod. "Glad you're healing up. Just don't try any high jumps until it's set properly." The instructor, a tall, multi-eyed Lithari named Oresa, approached the group, her voice gentle but curious. "Sergeant Mason, would you consider demonstrating your human methods for the class? It appears many of us could benefit from understanding alternative approaches to bone stabilization." Luke hesitated. He wasn't an instructor, just a student, but the attentive eyes of his classmates, including several who had watched him work in stunned silence, pushed him to agree. He gathered materials from the lab's supplies, plaster strips, gauze rolls, padding, and splinting rods, then demonstrated step by step how to immobilize a fracture. He explained how to check for circulation and nerve function before and after the splint was applied, how to pad bony prominences to prevent pressure sores, and how to secure the splint snugly without cutting off blood flow. As he worked, students leaned closer, some taking notes, others recording with handheld devices. Oresa nodded approvingly. "Fascinating. So you rely on the body's natural healing processes rather than immediate technological intervention." Luke wrapped the demonstration dummy's limb, smoothing the plaster strips with practiced ease. "Exactly. The human body knows how to heal itself if you give it time and the right support. You just have to keep it stable and protected while it does its job." A ripple of murmurs ran through the room, the alien students exchanging looks of surprise and newfound respect. Kivrek, still seated with his casted arm, murmured softly, I thought it was over when I felt the break. I thought, this is it. But you didn't even hesitate. Luke glanced at him, offering a small smile. When you've seen enough broken bones, you learn to tell the difference between a crisis and something that just needs a little patience. Bones heal. Panic doesn't help. That evening, Luke was invited to a roundtable hosted by the Medical Ethics Council at the Academy. Several professors, including Orisa and 2 senior bioreconstruction specialists, asked him to speak about human medical protocols for fracture management. He explained calmly, using earth examples, sports injuries, worksite accidents, childhood falls, how humans relied on observation, immobilization, and gradual rehabilitation. You mean? One Etherean professor said incredulously. You don't rush to reknit the bones with bioaugmenters or genetic scaffolds? Luke chuckled softly. Not unless it's an emergency. In most cases, a well-applied cast and patience do the job just fine. We monitor healing over weeks, sometimes months. There's no shortcut. The body knows what it's doing. The council exchanged thoughtful glances, and even the skeptical bioreconstructionist seemed less dismissive. As Luke left the meeting, walking back through the illuminated corridors of the academy, Mason jogged up to him, panting slightly. You're becoming something of a legend around here, he said, half joking. Luke shook his head, amused. I didn't do anything special. I just treated a broken bone like a broken bone. Yeah, Mason said, clapping him on the shoulder. But around here? That's revolutionary. Luke glanced out a window at the stars glittering beyond the academy's glass walls. He wondered briefly how many more surprises were waiting in the unknown, and how many of them might just need a steady hand, a calm voice, and a bit of gauze to make it through. Word of Luke's unconventional approach traveled further than he expected. By the start of the next week, the Academy's Med Center had begun quietly adapting some of his methods. The emergency response kits now included basic splint materials and gauze for initial stabilization, just in case advanced medical support wasn't immediately available. While not everyone was convinced, murmurs of the human method circulated through the hallways, particularly among the younger students eager to understand this practical approach. In class, Luke found himself fielding more questions about human physiology than his own coursework required. During a comparative anatomy session, an Atharian student leaned over, her luminescent fingers tapping her notes. Luke, how do human bones even manage to heal without augmentation? Don't they need something external to help? Luke glanced up from his sketches, thoughtfully tracing the outline of a femur on his screen. Nope, bones are living tissue. When they break, cells around the fracture signal repair. New bone starts forming. It's not instant, and it needs protection from movement, hence the cast. But the healing is natural. The Etherean's delicate brows furrowed. Our species can't imagine waiting that long. Luke offered a small smile. Patience is part of it. You respect the body's timeline. During a field training exercise later that week, the real test came. The students were divided into mixed species teams and tasked with navigating a simulated disaster zone, designed with collapsed structures and unstable terrain. They were required to locate injured volunteers, a mix of biomannequins and holographic projections, and administer aid as if in a real emergency. Luke's team, which included Kivrek, now back in limited duty with his cast, and Rorik, was assigned a sector deep in the simulation's labyrinth. As they navigated through jagged metal beams and low-light conditions, a sudden alarm blared. One of the Etherean students tripped over a concealed wire, their slender limbs snapping audibly against a steel girder. Gasps echoed through the simulation chamber. "We need extraction! Immediate stabilizers!" shouted another student, panic rising. Luke pushed through the group, kneeling by the injured student. Her translucent limb was bent sharply at the mid-cinema, the bone visibly misaligned beneath the thin skin. "It's a mid-shaft radial fracture," he said, voice calm. "No open wound. Vascular flows good." The simulation's medical drones hovered nearby, programmed to inject stabilizers and summon virtual surgical teams. The other students began calling for the override. Luke held up his hand. "Wait." "Wait? Rorvik exclaimed. "We can't wait. Her bone is shattered." "It's broken, not shattered," Luke corrected. "This is stable. She's not in shock. Let me set it." The Aetherian student, wincing but alert, nodded faintly. Luke quickly assessed distal circulation, confirmed sensation in her fingers, then used a rigid beam from the simulation debris as a splint. Wrapping it snugly with gauze from the field kit, he immobilized the arm, keeping it in a natural position. "There," he said, glancing at the others. "Now we can move her safely. No need for panic." The instructors monitoring the simulation fed data into the system, confirming that Luke's intervention not only stabilized the injury, but prevented further complications in the scenario. When the simulation ended, their team scored highest in field triage accuracy. The instructors praised Luke's quick thinking and his emphasis on preserving function and reducing panic. "Your approach minimized complications," one supervisor remarked, "and your confidence under pressure likely prevented the situation from escalating." That evening, the Aetherian student approached Luke in the cafeteria, her arm wrapped in a temporary cast for observation. "You kept me calm," she said quietly. "I was ready to panic." Luke smiled gently. "That's the thing. Panic makes it worse. Stay calm, think through the steps, and trust your training." Around them, the buzz of conversation was noticeably different from the days before. Instead of curiosity tinged with skepticism, the air was filled with genuine interest and even respect. Luke was no longer seen as the human oddity who had bypassed technology. He was the practical voice in a field where panic often overshadowed reason. Later that night, as Luke reviewed his notes alone in his room, a message appeared on his terminal. It was from Oresa, the Lethari instructor. The subject line read, "Field Lecture Request." Opening it, he found a short but pointed invitation. "We'd like you to conduct a practical session for our senior medical students on non-technological trauma management, focusing on fractures and musculoskeletal injuries. Your presence and perspective are requested." Luke leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. He wasn't a doctor, just a student with first aid training and a stubborn belief in staying calm, but maybe that was enough to make a difference. He tapped out a reply, "I'll do it." As the senior medical students gathered in the simulation wing's amphitheater, their species varied and postures tense. Rows of slender Aetherians with luminous skin sat beside broad-shouldered Mach, their ridged forearms crossed. Zerkri students murmured to one another in their chittering dialect, while the ever-curious Lethari leaned forward, translucent limbs twitching in anticipation. The lecture was unprecedented. A human student, not a professor, had been invited to demonstrate emergency fracture care without technological support. Luke Mason stood at the center of the demonstration platform, dressed in standard academy fatigues. On a nearby table lay splints, gauze, plaster rolls, elastic bandages, and a few fracture dummies, rigged with simulated injuries. He felt the weight of expectation in the silent air, but focused on his breathing. This wasn't new to him. What was new was the audience, and the unspoken challenge in their eyes. Oresa, the Lethari instructor, approached. "Thank you for accepting this," she said softly, voice carrying through the amphitheater. "Many of us want to understand what you did, how you turned panic into order with such simplicity." Luke inclined his head. "Thank you for trusting me to show you." He began by addressing the audience, his tone steady and clear. When someone breaks a bone, the first instinct is panic. The injury looks awful and the person is in pain, but the body's natural response is to protect the area and start healing. Our job is to support that process. Not every break needs surgery or advanced tech right away. Sometimes all it needs is immobilization, pain control, and patience. He picked up a simulated forearm with an obvious mid-shaft break. "This," he explained, "is a simple fracture. No open wound, no major displacement. We start by checking for blood flow and nerve function. Can the person feel touch? Are the fingers warm and pink? If yes, we move to splinting." Using slow, deliberate motions, he demonstrated how to pad the limb, align it gently without forcing, and apply a splint snugly to maintain immobilization. He showed how to secure the splint with gauze and elastic bandages, checking circulation after each wrap. The audience watched intently, murmuring quietly. A mock student raised a thick arm. But what if there's swelling? Wouldn't a rigid cast constrict blood flow? Good point, Luke said. That's why we pad generously and check circulation regularly. If the fingers swell, we adjust. A splint isn't permanent. It's a bridge to give the body time to heal before a full cast or other treatment. He moved to a more complex dummy with a simulated lower leg fracture. Here's a harder one, tibia fracture, unstable. This needs more support. We'd use a longer splint, pad under the ankle, and secure it above and below the joint. If available, we'd elevate the leg to reduce swelling and apply ice, though here in the field we'd improvise with whatever cold we can find. The Aetherians scribbled notes furiously. One Zerkri muttered, "They're so calm. How can a human think so clearly in an emergency?" Luke heard and answered. Calm comes from knowing the steps. I've seen breaks on farms, in sports fields, in accidents. Panic doesn't fix bones. Step by step, you stabilize. You assess, you act. For the next hour, he guided students through hands-on practice, correcting their splinting techniques, demonstrating how to apply even pressure, and explaining when to call for advanced care. Kivrak, his own arm still in a hybrid cast, assisted with positioning and shared his experience. I thought it was over, he told a group of wide-eyed juniors. But Luke just made it make sense. It wasn't a crisis, it was just a bone that needed support. As the session wound down, Aureus approached the front of the room, addressing the assembled students. Today, we witnessed an alternative approach to crisis care, one that emphasizes clarity, resourcefulness, and patience. Luke Mason has reminded us that not every emergency needs high technology. Sometimes, the best medicine is understanding, skill, and calm resolve. Luke felt a flush of humility but remained composed. Thank you for letting me share. I'm not a doctor, but these skills can save lives, no matter where you are. Learn them. Trust them. As the students filed out, several paused to thank him. A moke with a heavy gait said quietly, "Next time something happens, I'll think before I panic." An Aetherian added, "I'm going to practice these methods. I want to be ready too." Later that evening, Luke returned to his quarters, exhausted but satisfied. He reviewed messages from classmates, some asking for additional lessons, others sharing stories of how they'd already applied his methods in field simulations. One message stood out. A short note from Kivrak. "Thanks for saving my arm, Luke. More than that, thanks for showing me it wasn't the end of the world. I'll remember that." Luke smiled faintly, leaning back in his chair. His own world had once seemed overwhelming, filled with unfamiliar species, advanced technology, and alien concepts. But in the end, what had made the difference wasn't advanced degrees or complex procedures. It was staying calm, using what he knew, and showing others how to do the same. He looked out the window at the academy grounds below, the sky shifting from twilight to full night. Somewhere out there, students were practicing splints, wrapping gauze around simulated fractures, and maybe, just maybe, seeing injuries in a new light. And for the first time since he'd arrived, Luke felt not just competent, but at home.